Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I'm Angelia, and today it's time for Friday Reads. It's past time for Friday Reads because it's Saturday, but I wasn't here on Friday, so we're doing it now. And if you have been on the channel for more than 2 seconds, you know that I was out of town to see our daughter, Emma, graduate from college. And it was a lovely time. She did indeed graduate. We got to finally see her walk the stage. And then we had a really lovely dinner with she and some of her best friends. And it was just very, very nice. And so we are happy to cross off that parental milestone of seeing our child graduate from college. If you've been around for a little bit, you know that I mentioned previously that her plans right now are the immediate plans is she's staying on and doing some lab work. I guess you call it like post-bac, whatever, lab work on a project that she's been involved with at Texas State this summer. And then she's moving to San Antonio later in the summer to begin her PhD in developmental and regenerative science. So, yes, my scientist has graduated and all was happy throughout the land. I think we're going to see her again sooner than expected because she's going on a little lake trip. It kind of snuck up on her. And so I think she's going to be coming to our house tomorrow to drop off her cat for a few days, which works out perfectly for me because then I get to see her on Mother's Day. So anyway, here I am to talk about the week in reading and viewing. And it's probably not going to be super long because we were busy and traveling around, so I didn't have as much reading time and I didn't have time to watch YouTube videos at all. So once again, I am derelict in keeping up with other people's videos, but now I plan to chill out and start watching videos again and get kind of caught up. But anyway, so if we go back to the beginning of the week, I was reading Leonard and Hungry Paul. And this was just a delightful, charming, low-key, quiet gem. And I talked quite a bit about it last time, but then I went ahead and finished it. And this is just, it's a wonderful book. Please pick it at the right mood because there is no fast-paced plot. There are no crazy twists and turns or horrible family secrets or anything like that. It is just a quiet-paced novel about family, friends, kindness, just being comfortable with yourself. It's when you talk about what it's about, it doesn't sound like much, but somehow Ronan Hession has done something really unusual in this book because the main characters, Leonard and Hungry Paul, are two men who are in their 30s who still live at home. They do have jobs. Well, Leonard has a full-time job that he's not completely satisfied with, and Hungry Paul has just a part-time job. He's a substitute mailman, and he's perfectly happy with that job. It's not like he tried and failed to do something else. He's just content with his life. And usually characters like this in fiction or in TV or in movies, those people are they're kind of put in there for some kind of comic value or to represent someone who was a loser or a failure. They're, a slacker, they're a stoner, they're a weirdo, something like that. And in this book, they are none of those things. They are just kind of nice, low-key guys, and they like to get together and play board games. They enjoy their time with their family. They just don't have any high-stakes conflicts going on. They are content, and they're not anxious about it, and there's just something really refreshing about this. And Leonard, though, has come to a crossroads. His mother has passed away, and he starts to feel for the first time this kind of urge to do something more. He's not like horrendously discontented or unhappy. He just feels like he's ready to branch out a little bit. And some opportunities come his way. He has an idea for a book he wants to write, and he starts working on that. And he meets an interesting woman at work, and he gets up his courage to ask her out. And their first date is just the greatest scene. I love the first date that he has with Shelley. And then his good friend, Hungry Paul, change is kind of coming around. He wasn't really looking for anything different at all, but the the advent of his sister's wedding has kind of stirred things up. His parents are sort of semi-retired, and he doesn't go out looking for a change, and even though he's observing Leonard doing so, but something sort of comes his way because he decides to enter a contest, and the contest is to come up with a better closing line to put on emails. And he has this sudden idea in the middle of the night to enter in this contest. And there are consequences of this that kind of ripple into his life and give him some unexpected opportunities to consider. There's a wonderful conversation kind of deep in this book between Hungry Paul and his sister Grace. And this book also, I talked last week about it being kind of an ode to introverts. And there's so many introvert main characters in here that there's enough room for different styles of introverts. And Grace is kind of like me. There's a part where they describe where she's having this really busy day at work, and she had this whole plan because she has something she has to do later after work. And she had this plan where work was going to end at this time, and then she was going to have this piece of time at home to like take a bath and be quiet and recharge and then go on to this other thing. And then something comes up at work that keeps her late, and it takes away her little window, her little down window, and it makes her anxious. And that was me. Like, I cannot stand when things are piled on top of things and there's no quiet interludes. There's no like dead spaces to just be quiet and not interact in between other events. And so Grace actually addresses that in this novel. I don't know if I've ever seen that actually discussed in a novel, and that the discomfort of having to stay on and stay social from thing to thing and not having the buffer space to recharge in between. So I just felt seen in that part of the book, and how she met the man that she's going to marry, and how she can just relax and be weird at home with him, or just not talk at all, and so he's perfect. And I mean, she was so much like me. But there's this scene in the book where she and Hungry Paul have a conversation. And Grace is a worrier, as I am as well. And Grace has decided to worry about way off in the future, about things that might happen when their parents are very elderly, and whether Hungry Paul will step up and help her, or where she gets stuck with everything, or what's going to happen. And so she gets all built up about this and starts to unload it all on Hungry Paul. And it is such an excellent scene because in most books, this would be a conflict that built up, and then there'd be this big explosive fight between the siblings, a big blowout. But that doesn't happen at all. And the gentleness and directness of his rebuttal to her anxiety is so loving and so thoughtful and so perfect. And I don't even know how realistic it is, but I wish that it was the way that everybody had an argument, because he basically took the old, sounds a lot like your problem and not mine kind of situation, but he just does it so kindly. It's unbelievable. So I loved this book, and it is just a fantastic quiet gem that will definitely make it onto my list of favorite quiet gems at the end of the year. Maybe my all around favorites. Who knows? There's a lot of year left. But I did love the book. Then I read a book that I did not really love. And it's already gone back to the library, but I'll put a picture up here. And it was called Village in the Dark by Iris Yamashita, I think. I'll double check. But this was a sequel to a book I read last year, a thriller called City Under One Roof. And that book I thought was a really fun book. This one was not quite as good. This one kind of let me down. So in the first book, we are introduced to a detective named Kara Kennedy and it takes place in Alaska. And she's from Anchorage, and she has suffered a recent trauma in her life because her husband and young son went missing on a hiking trip, and then later were declared dead, and bodies were found. But she's never been fully satisfied about what exactly happened. And so in the first book, she goes to investigate the discovery of a body in this little town that's so tiny that everything is in one high-rise building. And you can only access this place through a tunnel in the winter because of the amount of snow. And it's just this really bizarre place, but really quirky characters that make it interesting, that live there year round. And so that was what was really fun about this book. The mystery wasn't that great, but all the weird characters that live in this building that she encounters made it really interesting. And it ended on a cliffhanger about her personal mystery. So we get into the second book, and she finds out something startling regarding her family problem, her family mystery. And so she is investigating both that and some other things that happen that relate to that village. So she goes back there again. And so it starts out really good. It starts out really mysterious and suspenseful, and some of the characters come back in. But then it kind of goes sideways because the plot becomes preposterous. And some of the best characters from the first book are either barely in there or not at all, and I was disappointed. So it wasn't too great. It was predictable, it was far-fetched, it was just kind of a not very good thriller. And I finished it because I wanted to see what was going to happen, but I was unsatisfied. So that one was kind of a bust. And that already brings us up to what I'm currently reading. A couple of them you've heard about a whole bunch of times. So I'm still reading Poetry Unbound, 1 or 2 poems a day, but I think I'm in the home stretch. It's only taken me a month and a half, but I'm really savoring and enjoying this so much. I want my own copy. And then I'm still reading The Anti-Racist Kitchen, which has these really beautiful little uplifting stories from 21 different children's authors about racism, diversity, inclusion, times that either they felt excluded or included, and all centering around food and how food is personal, cultural, it's family history, it can bring people together, and then there's recipes. So this is a really nice one that I'm enjoying, and I also included it in my list of self-care books for Mental Health May. And then the 2 novels that I've been reading that I'm still working on. This one I'm almost finished with, Gathering Blue by Lois Lowry, and this is one of the books in the Giver Quartet that starts with the Giver that I am buddy reading with Michael Clark. And so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it because we're still discussing it. And I got a little bit ahead because this is the one I took with me on the trip, and I didn't take anything else. So I kind of galloped ahead, and I'm kind of near the end. So I'm just going to hold my thoughts on that and maybe wrap it up next week after we had a chance to talk about it more. And then last but definitely not least, I'm reading All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Toews. And this was my first book to read by this author and one of my selections also for Mental Health May. And this book, I didn't take it with me, so I haven't gotten that far, but I'm about a third of the way through, and this is just a beautifully written book. It is. I was wondering how it could be funny about such a sad topic, but really it is, because of the voice of Yoli, the sister who is narrating this story of basically trying desperately to convince her sister Elf to stay in this world and to not commit suicide. Elf is a wonderfully talented pianist, just a interesting thinker. She's been kind of a renegade her whole life. They grow up in this very cloistered kind of very tight Mennonite village in Canada, and Elf was just a breakout star who was not going to do anything traditional, and she leaves to study music and becomes a world famous pianist. But she is heavily hindered by depression, as was their father. And so we get into, there's issues of grief, mental illness, the legacy of that in families, their background, but then all of like the joy of their sister relationship, remembering just all kinds of antics, and this the closeness and the humor in their conversations with each other when they're not talking about the really terrible thing at the heart of it all. And so that's where I am in the book. I haven't gotten really deeply into it, but I feel I feel really nervous about Elf and what's going to happen with her. And so I'll have a lot more to say about it next week when I have gotten farther. Probably will have read the whole rest of the book because it's kind of hard to put down once you get started. So I was really glad to be reunited with it after my trip so I can really, dive into it deeper. But so far it's been really beautiful. I don't know what I marked here. Let's see if I have anything real quote worthy here. Okay, one of the passages I marked I cannot read to you because it's a complete spoiler, but this one I can share. And this one kind of describes the importance of piano as in the background of their childhood, and kind of also illuminates a little bit of the relationship or how Yoli feels about Elf. Piano scales were the musical soundtrack to my youth. I could do anything to Elf while she practiced her scales and she wouldn't notice. I could put raisins on the keys, and she'd flick them off, unperturbed, as her fingers zoomed up and down the entire length of the piano. I could lie on top of the piano in a sexy pose and sing, I am a V-A-M-P, like Cher, and she wouldn't miss a single note. But her eyes never left the keys except when they closed in rapturous ecstasy for a second or two. And then the pace of the music would change, and Elf would open her eyes and fling herself at the piano like a leopard onto a snake, a savage assault as though the piano were both her lover and most mortal enemy. Okay, I love the descriptions of music in this book than I did in Bel Canto. It's working for me here, where it didn't in that book. So happy to report that at least. And loving this book so far. Once I finish with Gathering Blue, I'll pick another book to pair up there. I'm not sure which one, but I am working my way through my May TBR and enjoying all of that, except for that thriller that kind of went sideways. But that was one of those random library things. So anyway, that's it. What have you been reading? What have you got going on this weekend? Let me know in the comments. And if you are celebrating Mother's Day this weekend, happy Mother's Day. And I will be back on Tuesday to do something from my island of lost and incomplete tags. So I'll be back for that. Until then, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.